What if the salvation of an entire nation depended on one woman's secret? What if the fate of a nation rested in the hands of an orphan queen who had to hide who she was in order to survive? This is not a legend or a fairy tale. It's the true story of one of the greatest displays of courage ever recorded, a plot of political intrigue, palace conspiracies and genocidal hatred set in the heart of the most powerful empire on earth. It's the story of how a young woman, placed in an impossible position, risked absolutely everything to confront power and tyranny. It teaches us that sometimes the most unlikely person in the most unexpected place is called by God to change the course of history. Get ready to learn about the journey of Hadassah, the young Jewish girl who became Esther, the queen who saved her people from extermination. This is the story of Queen Esther's courage. Our story begins in the epicenter of the ancient world, the city of Susan, capital of the vast Persian Empire under the command of King Ahasuerus, also known as Xerxes I, a monarch of immense power and an equally great temperament. During a monumental 180-day festival designed to show off his glory, the king, drunk on wine and pride, orders his wife, Queen Vashti, to stand before his guests so that everyone can admire her beauty. In an act of defiance that shocked the empire, Vashti refused. The public affront was intolerable. Advised by his nobles, who feared that the queen's example would inspire disobedience in all the women of the kingdom, Ahasuerus took a drastic decision. Vashti was deposed, banished forever from the king's presence. The crown was removed from her head, leaving a vacuum on the throne and in the heart of Persian power. A royal decree was then dispatched to the 127 provinces of the empire. The most beautiful virgins of all the nations were to be gathered in Shushan. Among them, a new queen would be chosen. What began as a drama of wounded pride and royal power was actually the sound of God's invisible hand moving the pieces on a cosmic chessboard, setting the stage for a miracle that no one could have predicted. The stage was set for the arrival of an unlikely heroine. Far from the splendor and intrigue of the palace, a young Jewish girl of captivating beauty called Hadassah lived in Shushan. Orphaned by her father and mother, she was adopted and raised with deep love by her cousin, Mordecai, a God-fearing man from the tribe of Benjamin. He instructed her in the ways and traditions of his people, who lived as exiles in a foreign land. When the king's decree echoed through the city, Hadassah, now known by her Persian name, Ester, which means star, was taken with the other girls to the royal harem. Her beauty was undeniable, but it was her grace, humility, and wisdom that set her apart. Following Mordecai's wise advice, she kept her Jewish identity an absolute secret, a crucial decision for her survival. In the palace, Esther won the favor of everyone, including Hegai, the eunuch in charge of the women. After a year of preparations, it was her turn to present herself to the king. Ahasuerus, captivated by her presence, loved Esther more than all the other women. He removed Vashti's crown and placed it on Esther's head, making her the new queen of Persia. The hidden star now shone in the highest firmament of power. It was a meteoric and miraculous rise, but one that placed her in a position of dangerous isolation, carrying a secret that would soon become the key to the fate of her people. While Esther's star was rising, a sinister shadow was also growing in the kingdom. Haman, a man consumed by arrogance, was exalted by the king above all the other princes. The king ordered everyone to bow down to him. But at the palace gate, one man refused, Mordecai. For him, such reverence was due only to God. Haman's lineage, that of an Agagite, descended from an ancient king who was an enemy of the Israelites, further ignited the fire of conflict. Mordecai's refusal was not just a personal insult for Haman, it was the spark that ignited a genocidal hatred. Blinded by fury, Haman was not content to punish just one man. He plotted the annihilation of all Mordecai's people. With cunning and poisonous words, he went to the king, describing the Jews as a rebellious and different people, a threat to the empire. Offering a huge sum of silver, he convinced the king to sign a decree for their extermination. The king recklessly handed over his signet ring, the irrevocable signature of Persian power. Haman cast Pur, the lot, which set the day of the massacre for the 13th day of the month of Adar. The decree was sealed and sent to the entire empire. The death sentence for an entire people was now in force, and the countdown to the tragedy had begun. News of the decree spread like poison through the veins of the empire. Wherever the order reached, there was an overwhelming lament among the Jews. Weeping, fasting, and wailing became the language of a doomed people. Men, women, and children dressed in sackcloth and covered themselves in ashes, a universal sign of deep anguish and mourning. Mordecai, heartbroken, tore his clothes and went to the square in front of the palace gate, crying out with a loud and bitter cry of pain. The city of Shushan was in a state of shock and confusion, but for the Jews, the darkness seemed total. Within the safe walls of the palace, Queen Esther, initially oblivious to the impending catastrophe, was deeply disturbed to hear of her cousin's distress. She sent him new clothes, but he refused them because his pain was too deep to cover. It was then that Mordecai, through a messenger, revealed the terrible truth to her. He sent her a copy of the extermination decree and an order that would make her blood run cold. She was to go before the king, intercede and plead for the lives of her people. The young orphan, now queen, was suddenly confronted with a weight that seemed impossible to carry. The time for silence was over. It was time to act. Mordecai's order filled Esther with paralyzing fear. Her initial response was a reminder of the deadly law of the Persian court. Anyone who approached the king without being summoned would be immediately executed, unless the king extended his golden scepter. And it had been 30 days since the king had summoned her. Her life was hanging by a thread, but Mordecai's response was implacable and prophetic. He warned her not to think that, because she was in the palace, she would escape the fate of her people. And then he uttered the words that would change everything, echoing like thunder in her soul. And who knows, if it wasn't for such a time as this that you came to be queen. In that instant, her life's purpose became crystal clear. Fear gave way to supernatural courage. Esther, the passive young woman, died, and in her place was born a determined leader. She sent her response to Mordecai, not only accepting the mission, but taking spiritual control of the situation. She ordered all the Jews in Shushan to fast with her for 3 days and 3 nights. And then, with a total surrender that would become legendary, she declared, "After this, I will go to the king, even if it is against the law. If I have to die, I will." Her plan was set not just in strategy, but in faith. With the spiritual support of her fasting people, Esther dressed in her royal robes and stood in the inner courtyard of the palace. When the king saw her, he held out his golden scepter. The first barrier had been overcome. With strategic wisdom, instead of making her request immediately, she invited the king and Haman to a private banquet. Haman left the banquet exultant, feeling like the most honored man in the kingdom. His joy, however, was shattered when he saw Mordecai at the gate, still refusing to bow. Consumed by hatred, he went home and, at his wife's suggestion, ordered the construction of a colossal gallows, over 20 meters high, to hang Mordecai the next morning. But that very night, the hand of God moved decisively. King Ahasuerus couldn't sleep. He ordered the books of the kingdom's chronicles to be read to him. The passage read was precisely the account of how Mordecai had uncovered a conspiracy and saved the king's life, an act for which he had never been rewarded. Just as the king was asking what could be done for such a man, Haman arrived in the courtyard. eager to call for Mordecai's execution. The king then asked him, "What should be done to a man whom the king delights to honor?" Haman, thinking that the honor was for himself, described an extravagant ceremony. The king's reply was a stroke of divine irony that humiliated Haman spectacularly. "Go quickly and do all this to Mordecai the Jew." The day of the second banquet arrived, and the atmosphere was filled with unbearable tension. The king, Haman, and Esther were gathered together. Knowing that the moment of truth had arrived, the king once again offered Esther anything she wanted, even half of his kingdom. Her heart pounding, but her voice firm, Esther finally made her petition. "If I have obtained favor in your sight, O king, let my life be given me and the life of my people." The king, confused and alarmed, asked, "Who is he? Where is the man who had the audacity in his heart to do such a thing?" It was the moment all heaven and earth had been waiting for. Esther raised her hand and with a trembling finger pointed to the man sitting with them at the table. "The adversary and enemy," she declared, "is this wicked Haman." Terror seized Haman's face. The color drained from his face. The king, exploding in fury, got up and went to the palace garden to prosecute the betrayal. Haman, in total panic, threw himself at Esther's feet, on the couch where she reclined, begging for his life. When the king returned and saw the scene, his fury turned into a sentence. At that moment, one of the king's servants pointed out the perfect and poetic solution. "In Haman's house, there is a gallows that he has prepared for Mordecai." The king's order echoed, sealing the climax of the story with divine justice. "Hang him on it!" With the fall of Haman, the tide turned spectacularly. Esther and Mordecai were given the authority to write a new decree, which gave the Jews the right to defend themselves against their enemies on the day that had been set for their annihilation. Sadness was turned into joy, and mourning into celebration. Esther's story is not just about one woman's courage. It is a powerful testimony to God's providence, who works behind the scenes, using ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances to fulfill his purposes. He transforms the pride of kings, the anger of tyrants, and the fear of his servants into a perfect script of redemption. Mordecai's question echoes to this day for each of us. Who knows if it wasn't for a time like this that you were placed where you are? Perhaps you too have a role to play, a voice to use, a position to occupy for the glory of God and the good of others. Which part of Esther's courage inspired you the most? Leave your thoughts in the comments. If this message has touched your heart, like it, share it, and subscribe to the channel for more transformative stories.